Morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. We're excited this morning to introduce Ken Bush to you all, and also our new CEU, which Ken authored for us. It's called Climate Positive Materials and Sustainable Interiors. This is one IDCEC credit hour with the HSW designation, so that's a health, safety, and wellness designation. And once Ken's presentation has concluded and you would like the material to be able to present this yourselves, you can just reach out to me, jbramas@ofs.com, and I can send you the information and then also add you to the IDCEC presenter list if you're not already on there. I believe I just need your name, address, and contact information to add you. And then also, if you have any questions during Ken's presentation, just put those in the question box and we'll try to address those at the end. Now, a little bit about Ken. Ken Bush is the founder of Material Intelligence and also Climate Positive Now. The websites are materialintelligence.com and climatepositivenow.org. And I encourage you to check both of those websites out. Ken is a longtime journalist and magazine editor in the North American, European, and Asian interior and furniture design markets, and covers major materials and furniture design fairs in the US and Europe. Ken has been creating certified educational content for architects and designers for over 20 years and consults with material suppliers, furniture and cabinet companies, and industry associations striving to turn sustainability into a competitive advantage. A veteran public speaker, he has presented to industry audiences throughout North and Central America, Europe, and Asia. Ken created the Materials Pavilion at NeoCon, which is an immersive educational experience for designers and design students, which became the exhibition's most visited booth for several years running. More recently, Ken is also working with architecture and interior design educators to bring much needed materials-focused content and inspiration to future generations of specifiers for furniture and the built environment. And this is not in Ken's bio, but Ken is a very energetic and passionate person and a real advocate for our industry and also for OFS, and just an all-around good guy. So without further delay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ken, and he can begin his presentation.
Thank you so much, Jared. I didn't realize I gave you the full War and Peace version of my bio, but I appreciate that. Yeah, my entire world has been trying to figure out how to help our industry tell a more cohesive and relatable story about materials and now more sustainability over the last 15 years ago. So the opportunity to do the CEU with OFS was really right on target with what everybody is talking about now, which is carbon. Doug Shapiro, maybe he's on here somewhere. He participated in a panel discussion last month at AWFS that I moderated called The Carbon Denominator, how to talk more intelligently about carbon as the furniture industry. So without further ado, perfect timing here. I want to get this rolling. I am going to be looking down at my script here. I somehow screwed up my setup so that I can't look at the camera and my script at the same time. So bear with me on that front. But the gist of this is buildings and interiors are the largest emitters of CO2. Designers can make a measurable difference through more informed decisions. And so that was sort of the guiding, the guiding mission for this CEU. If anybody's been involved with CEUs before, you know this is boilerplate here. I won't dwell on it, but this is where the participants get their course number and whatnot. Key takeaways, otherwise known as learning objectives, how to think about sustainability in terms of health, sustainability skepticism and what is meant by greenwashing, environmental impacts in terms of CO2 emissions are expressed as carbon footprint, and buildings and interiors are the single largest emitter of CO2. So starting with the scope of sustainability, I love this quote doing research on these kinds of projects. There is an environmentalist and an environmental engineer named Clara Fang who said a few years back now, in nature, sustainability is not a healthy state of things. A healthy ecosystem is vibrant, thriving, dynamic, and creative. In a climax ecosystem, such as a mature rainforest, diverse species find their own niche in the ecosystem, and the activities of one of those feed one another. A healthy ecosystem is resilient, an environment where all living things thrive. Human societies are the same way. A society that merely sustains itself is in trouble. It is on the verge of collapsing. So talking about the scope of sustainability in that context drives us to some very specific ways of thinking about this. There are many different ways to talk about sustainability when it comes, especially when it comes to the production and use of products and materials in the building industry. The use of virgin or recycled raw materials, impacts on ecosystems, packaging and transportation, ease of manufacturing and installation, replacement of less sustainable materials, durability, longevity, and ease of care and maintenance, carbon offsets and sequestration, and circularity and end of life. These are all different categories of how we can talk about sustainability. And in this CEU, we're obviously going to be leaning into the ones that are more related to carbon and carbon sequestration and the carbon cycle. So greenhouse gases, also known as GHGs. Many of the issues I just mentioned are interrelated, and most are tied directly to carbon or CO2. Carbon dioxide is the most important greenhouse gas in Earth's atmosphere. It's also the metric by which we assess the climate impacts of different products and materials. In this CEU, we'll be discussing new thinking on the true meaning of sustainability, the causes and effects of man-made climate change, and how the choices designers make have real-world impacts. We'll also explore a category of materials you're already using, that go beyond sustainable, that are actually climate positive. So 5 takeaways for where we're going with this CEU. When people talk about sustainability, they're usually referring to protecting human and environmental health for future generations by finding better ways to live within nature's ability to supply our needs and absorb the impacts of our lifestyles. There's growing skepticism about our efforts thus far, from ineffective consumer recycling practices to questions about the real impacts of carbon offset credits, to disgust with the blatant and misleading greenwashing campaigns out there. The best way to scientifically assess the impacts of a material, product, or company, or industry is to measure its CO2 emissions, expressed as carbon footprint or embodied carbon. Buildings in the construction industry emit almost 40% of all global CO2 every year. And architectural products account for 1/3 of all the landfill waste in the United States. Over the life of a building, researchers suspect now that interiors actually have a higher impact than the building shell. Increasing the use of wood-based products is a climate positive multiplier effect. Wood naturally regenerates, captures carbon and releases oxygen, and stores naturally captured carbon until it decomposes or burns, potentially for hundreds of years. So in the first takeaway, we mentioned thinking of sustainability in terms of health. This is a great metaphor because good personal health hinges on making informed choices about our diet, our exercise, and treating illness. The same is true for the health of our environment and planet. Understanding impacts and the root causes of climate change, global warming, or however you choose to describe it, is the first step toward making choices that will have measurable positive impacts and leading your clients and markets on this journey. So glossary break. I think I'm one slide too far. So glossary break. Greenhouse gases, also known as GHGs, are gases in the Earth's atmosphere that trap heat generated by solar energy hitting the Earth's surface. CO2 is by far the most abundant greenhouse gas, followed by methane and nitrous oxide. In some calculations, water vapor is also considered a greenhouse gas, but its levels are a byproduct of a warming atmosphere. Unlike other greenhouse gases, water vapor levels cannot be controlled by human intervention. So the current state of our climate, in the script, the headline is 1.5 Celsius by 2050 or bust. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, avoiding global climate crisis requires limiting the mean temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. The UN's climate change action coalitions are through mincing words on this. Quote, climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment. From shifting weather patterns that threaten food production to rising sea levels that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding, the impacts of climate change are global in scope and unprecedented in scale. Without drastic action today, adapting to these impacts in the future will be more difficult and more costly. The cause of this crisis is the rapidly rising levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, CO2 being the most important. Life on Earth wouldn't be possible with some level of greenhouse gases because they act as a layer of insulation, keeping some of the sun's warmth from reflecting back into space. But the natural nurturing levels of CO2 have been thrown out of balance over the last 150 years. In fact, they've risen to record levels not seen in 3 million years. As populations, economies, and standards of living grow, so does the cumulative level of greenhouse gas emissions. So what can be done about this? Perhaps a better way to phrase the question is, what can we as designers and specifiers do about this? First, as consumers, we can try to live more lightly, travel more consciously, and do business with companies and industries that we know are making an honest effort. The impacts of transportation and energy are well understood, and several companies and industries are moving in the right direction. But making the necessary changes purely in the way we burn hydrocarbons between now and the time we're told is the point of no return is a pretty big ask. The disruptions to economies and standards of living would be enormous. And consumer recycling, well, is not and never will be the panacea we hoped it would be, thanks at least in part to aggressive and sophisticated greenwashing campaigns and plenty of natural and man-made confusion around the topic. Quote, companies are actively using recycling as a distraction and an excuse, according to an article in the Atlantic magazine in January 2021. How useful is consumer recycling really? Name of the article. Many see corporate recycling pledges as a means of evading real climate action. We'll dig more into greenwashing in a little bit. Project Drawdown, a nonprofit group that conducts and reviews climate solutions, includes recycling in its recommendations for reining in emissions. The group analyzed more than 80 separate means that could help keep the world from passing the oft-cited threshold of 1.5 C of warming. And the recycling industry's projected contributions fell below the median, trailing geothermal power, efficient aviation, forest protection, and dozens of other initiatives. Each person in the United States produces a lot of plastic waste every year, up from 80 pounds in 1980 to over 218 pounds for each and every one of us in 2018. We learned recently from a report on National Public Radio that only about 5% of the plastic we drop in those cheerful blue or green bins actually ever gets recycled. The rest ends up in landfills. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. We got a memo a couple of years ago from our alders saying, if you put one wrong plastic item in the recycling bin, that entire truckload of recycling gets sent to the landfill. So by my calculation, that probably means just about, because of all the confusion, just about every truck is going to a landfill. So unfortunately, the way plastic recycling has been promoted has led to the consumption and waste of more and more plastic, confusion over which plastics can be recycled, and an explosion in wish cycling. So if this were a live room, I'd ask if anybody's heard the term wish cycling. it's putting something in the recycling bin and hoping it will be recycled. And I'm guilty of this. Everybody is, I'm pretty sure. Even if there is little evidence to confirm this assumption. Wish cycling feeds the guilt-free consumerism that is still accelerating plastic consumption and waste. So try this. Don't use single-use plastic for the rest of the day. Only plastics whose polymers can easily and truly be recycled into new products. And then we wrote, good luck after that, because I think that's pretty much impossible. So here's where the good news starts. Designers can move the needle. So we mentioned that buildings are the largest emitter of CO2, which means the choices we make as designers can actually move the needle on climate change. This is because buildings in the construction industry are still the single largest contributor of greenhouse gases, accounting for 40% of the annual CO2 emissions, as we mentioned earlier. This is nearly as much as the US and China combined. Concrete is a major contributor. Cement alone, the binding agent in concrete, accounts for 7% of annual CO2 emissions globally, even though it is 30% more carbon efficient than it was in 1960. And more efficient lighting, heating, and cooling technologies are also certainly helping. So it was long thought that the interiors played only a minor role, but the research conducted by the Carbon Leadership Forum and the Seattle-based architecture firm LMN Architects indicates that interior designers may be responsible for emissions at least equal to those associated with the structure and the envelope of the building. Interior design, it turns out, has been doing great harm, according to Metropolis magazine, because of the number of renovations and refits over the lifetime of a building envelope. The good news is this represents a great opportunity. As design specifiers, it's important that we know and are able to share the practical and yet critical role we play in addressing climate change. To do that effectively, it's important to understand the basics of the challenges we are all facing. So, climate change. What exactly is climate change? Some quick facts from the United Nations. The concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere is directly linked to the global temperature on Earth. The concentration has been rising steadily, and mean global temperatures along with it, since the time of the Industrial Revolution. The most abundant greenhouse gas, accounting for about 2/3 of all GHGs, is carbon dioxide, CO2, and it's largely a product of burning fossil fuels. So, the effects of global warming and its impacts. Climate change describes global warming and the cascading impacts from warmer air and oceans on our biomes and ecosystems, which include the regularity, predictability, and severity of our weather patterns. Got every headline this summer. Extended historical severe droughts, loss of polar ice caps and ice sheets, redistribution of inland water supplies, rising sea levels, and increased frequency of historically extreme floods. These changes are driving disruptions in the distribution and life cycles of sea and land animals, reductions in crop yields, reductions in the nutritional quality of our plant-based foods, added stress and lower productivity of meat animals, respiratory issues, and cancer in humans. So you remember our health analogy from earlier? Like the systems that work together to keep our bodies healthy and functioning, the forces that create our climate are all connected. Life on Earth evolved with and continues to depend on maintaining a certain balance of these interconnected systems. Human activity is disrupting this balance, causing a cascading series of challenges that scientists refer to as feedback loops. So using water vapor as an example, this is what a feedback loop looks like. As more and more heat-trapping greenhouse gases are emitted, the atmosphere warms up. This warmer air leads to more water evaporating from our oceans, rivers, lakes, and land, and entering the atmosphere. Warmer air holds more water vapor. I should say, the extra water vapor, oh, sorry. Warmer air holds more water vapor, and water vapor itself traps heat. Indeed, it is the Earth's most abundant greenhouse gas. The extra vapor and already warmer air retains even more heat, amplifying the initial warming. More warming leads to even more water evaporating. For every 1 degree Celsius in temperature rise, 7% more water evaporates and can be held by the atmosphere. More water evaporating exposes more carbonate rock to the soil and atmospheric erosion, increasing even more CO2 in the atmosphere. And this cycle repeats, becoming more intense with time. This feedback loop will gather intensity as more Arctic ice melts away. Arctic ice plays a major role in regulating the Earth's air and water temperature partly because it reflects radiation back into space instead of absorbing it like open water and dry land does. Warmer temperatures cause that ice to disappear. As warmer temperatures cause that ice to disappear, carbon stored in permafrost, as well as in frozen peat bogs and under sediment on the sea floor, enters the atmosphere. As these bogs and permafrost thaw, long sequestered methane and carbon are released into the atmosphere, adding yet more greenhouse gases that can lead to further global warming. More warming results in more permafrost loss, putting more GHGs in the atmosphere, and you get the picture. This is a feedback loop. Arctic soil holds an estimated 1,460 to 1,600 billion tons of trapped carbon, almost twice the amount of GHGs currently in the atmosphere. So it's easy to understand why scientists are so concerned about the acceleration of this feedback loop. The year 2030 is often cited as a tipping point, at which time we will no longer be able to change the hockey stick trajectory of global warming. But what really is carbon, and why does it have such an important role in our climate? And what, if anything, can humans do about carbon's impact on climate change? As specifiers of materials for furniture and interiors, what do we need to know? So, what is carbon and why is it elemental to life on Earth? Carbon is a chemical element like hydrogen and oxygen and is the 6th most abundant element in the universe. It's a solid and it can take on many different forms. Diamonds are one pure form of carbon. The other two are graphite, which is pencil lead, and carbon black, which is a sooty material found in pigments for inks and paints and plastics and used as the filler in rubber tires. So carbon as an element is not particularly plentiful on our planet. It makes up only about 0.025% of the Earth's crust in the oceans and in rocks and sediment, but it bonds easily with other elements, forming more compounds than all the other elements combined. Carbon is the chemical backbone of all life on Earth, accounting for 18% of our body mass by weight as a component of sugars and proteins, fats and DNA, muscle, tissue, and bone. Trees, on the other hand, are 50% carbon by weight. So people are 18% carbon by weight, trees are 50% by weight. So one of the confusing things when we're talking about carbon and sustainability is understanding how people are using the words carbon versus CO2. So often when people say carbon, it's shorthand for CO2 or carbon dioxide. But CO2 and carbon are not the same thing. CO2 is a colorless and odorless gas emitted when all animals exhale. And it's given off when formerly living things, plants and animals, decay. It's also generated when these formerly living things in the form of coal and oil are burned. It's a greenhouse gas, which means that with other GHGs, it acts as a blanket, keeping heat from escaping our atmosphere and preventing the planet from freezing over. This is why a certain level of CO2 is essential for sustaining life. CO2 is measured in parts per million, or ppm. For much of the last 10,000 years, CO2 levels hovered around 280 parts per million. In 1960, our atmospheric CO2 was 318 parts per million. In 2015, it passed the 400 part per million threshold more than 40% higher than it was in pre-industrial times, where the value was 280 parts per million. And this is a level that has not existed on Earth in several million years. In 2021, the monthly average topped 420 ppm, 50% higher than pre-industrial levels. The annual rate of increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide over the past 60 years is about 100 times faster than previous natural increases, 100 times faster than natural increases. So that such as those that occurred at the end of the last ice age, 11,000 to 17,000 years ago. Around 2.7 billion years ago, CO2 levels were very high, possibly as high as 7,000 parts per million. But the sun was much weaker then, and the trapped solar heat was enough to support primitive life. Tiny living anaerobic, which means animals that can live within an atmosphere with no oxygen. Tiny living anaerobic organisms that were able to generate energy from minerals in the ocean were the predominant form of life at that time. At about this time, a new form of life appeared, cyanobacteria, which were able to produce energy from sunlight using photosynthesis. Photosynthesizers absorb CO2, split off and release the oxygen module, and use the carbon to manufacture the carbohydrates they need to grow. Ironically, this new atmospheric gas, oxygen, was poisonous to the anaerobic life and created Earth's first great extinction event. The new life then evolved with the ability to utilize this oxygen through respiration, breathing, and this event is actually known as the Great Oxidation Event. It's interesting to note that the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere varies by 5 parts per million between winter and summer, as the northern boreal forests breathe by releasing CO2 when they go dormant in the winter and absorbing more CO2 as they come to life in the spring and summer. So greenhouse gases by the numbers. You can see that carbon dioxide is the huge majority. We do mention water vapor a couple times in the CEU, but like as we mentioned earlier, that's not something that can be controlled by mankind. It's really more of a byproduct of all these other inputs. So carbon is energy. Every time we generate energy in power plants and transportation, hydrocarbons, right, and fossil fuels, and even in our own bodies, carbohydrates, CO2 is released. Every step in creating any product releases carbon into the atmosphere as CO2, whether it's resource extraction, manufacturing, transportation, and in the case of materials used in interiors, the energy involved in installation. Carbon is also released when we disturb the soil or exposed carbonate rock like limestone and dolomite, and as we learned earlier, when permafrost thaws. Limestone and dolomite are actually two of the big ingredients used in concrete. So remembering that there's only a fixed amount of carbon in the universe, we're not generating new carbon with these activities. We're releasing it from where it had been stored, which brings us to the carbon cycle. So the carbon cycle and captured carbon. Most of the Earth's carbon is stored in rocks, soil, and sediments. The rest is located in the ocean, the atmosphere, and in living organisms like us. These are the reservoirs or sinks through which carbon cycles. The carbon cycle is the flow of carbon through the atmosphere, ocean, terrestrial biosphere, and lithosphere, which is the Earth's crust and upper mantle. We use the carbon cycle to describe and track the exchange of carbon through the Earth's carbon reservoirs, which store and transport carbon in many ways. The flow is measured in gigatons of carbon per year, and it may be stored in gaseous, liquid, and solid form in the atmosphere, land, and sea. Carbon moves from one storage reservoir to another through a variety of mechanisms, sometimes taking centuries, sometimes just hours. For example, in the food chain, plants move carbon from the atmosphere and into the biosphere through photosynthesis. Animals eat plants and digest the sugar molecules to get energy for their bodies. That's where the carbon is in plants. Respiration, excretion, and decomposition release the carbon back into the atmosphere or soil, continuing the cycle. The ocean holds about 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere, and some of it for centuries in the very deep. Carbonate rocks and fossil fuels are storage reservoirs that contain carbon from plants and animals that lived millions of years ago. Processes like erosion release this carbon back into the atmosphere very slowly. Volcanic activity and burning fossil fuels in cars and power plants releases carbon very quickly back into the atmospheric reservoir. So the planetary CO2 blanket that helped nurture life has been thrown askew as carbon stored over millions of years is now being released back into our already overburdened atmosphere year after year. Bearing the brunt of scrubbing excess CO2 from the air are healthy forests. Trees naturally capture atmospheric CO2, use the carbon to create the sugars for their growth, and release the oxygen, running on nothing but sunlight and water using the process of photosynthesis. That naturally captured carbon then is sequestered until that wood burns or decomposes, making wood nature's most perfect carbon capture and storage mechanism. So, glossary break. Oh, I might have gotten behind on a slide there. Let me see here. Yeah, sorry about that, you guys. I got behind on one of the slides. Glossary break. Carbon sequestration and carbon storage. Carbon sequestration or carbon uptake refers to the active process of removing carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the atmosphere into a construction material. Carbon storage refers to a material keeping that carbon as part of itself for a period of time. We use these terms often interchangeably, but there is actually some debate about what the finer points of the meanings of both of those terms are. So there are two types of carbon sequestration. Biological carbon sequestration, which is the storage of carbon dioxide in vegetation such as grasslands or forests, as well as in soils and oceans. And then geological carbon sequestration, which is the process of storing carbon dioxide in underground geological formations or rocks. Typically, carbon dioxide is captured from an industrial source with geological carbon sequestration, such as steel or cement production, and or an energy-related source, such as a power plant or a natural gas processing facility, and then ejected into rocks for long-term storage. So, we're getting into the good news part of the CEU. Managed forests, right? The role of managed forests. So here's some fun did you knows about forests in North America. Across the United States, average annual net growth in 2016, these are the latest numbers we have, so average annual net growth in 2016 was twice the average annual removals. Wood is considered an infinitely renewable resource and the only renewable building material. The North American forests, where we source most of our fiber for furniture, are known as boreal forests or snow forests or taiga forests, and are home to some 800 species of trees. These forests cover around 17% of the Earth's terrestrial area and are very influential to the climate. The United States has 766 million acres of forest land, covering 33% of our total land area. These forests absorb nearly 16% of our carbon dioxide emissions per year. They store 866 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, a quantity equivalent to the annual emissions from 50 million gas or diesel-fueled vehicles. Forests naturally absorb and store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Although significant regional changes have occurred, the total area of forest land has been fairly stable for the last 100 years. In much of North America, if we stopped mowing our lawns, we'd have a naturally generated full-blown forest in 40 years. So the role of healthy managed forests. These are all the forests, the boreal forests or taiga forests or snow forests. These are the forests from which we get our flooring, siding, lumber, and fiber for composite wood panels like particle board and MDF. They were designed by nature to regrow after being decimated by fire or insects every 40 years or so. Well-intentioned humans have interrupted these natural cycles to protect property and recreational areas, resulting in excess fuel for fires that sometimes burn so hot they actually sterilize the soil. Forestry management restores these cycles by carefully selecting and harvesting plots of older trees when they provide maximum yield, but before they lose their ability to absorb carbon and produce oxygen. The resulting open meadows are perfect for the next generation of young, healthy trees. These ecosystems are naturally self-regenerating, such that in North America, only 1 out of every 5 trees requires replanting. In the script, we got 8 trees there. I got to fix that. There's new data, always new data. This is a moving target with this topic. So most working forests are used by North American furniture producers as certified managed forests. There are a handful of different forestry management certifications, the most common of which you've all heard of is FSC, or Forestry Stewardship Council. I think there's a slide coming here. The Forestry Stewardship Council is a global initiative designed to ensure healthy forests for our future generations, and that industries involved in forestry and others producing products from resources harvested from the forest. There are 2 types of FSC certifications. FSC Forest Management Certification confirms, that's the first one, FSC Forest Management Certification confirms that the forest is being managed in a way that preserves the natural ecosystem and benefits the lives of local people and workers, all while ensuring that it sustains economic viability. To secure the certification, FSC members have agreed upon a set of criteria that forest managers and owners have to meet. Forest management certification helps protect people and plant species that live in and around and depend upon the forest. Forest areas are often home to communities of indigenous people who live and work on the land, and for whom the forest is a source of essential food or materials and a contributor to their traditional cultural identity. To meet social criteria, certificate holders must respect indigenous people's land rights, enhance forest workers' rights. Forest managers are required to protect areas of high conservation value. These may contain significant concentration of plant or animal species, rare, threatened, or endangered ecosystems, or areas of rare or outstanding biological, ecological, or social value. The second type of FSC certification is the chain of custody, FSC chain of custody certification, which verifies that FSC certified material has been identified and separated from non-certified and non-controlled material as it makes its way along the supply chain from A all the way through B. Consumers are increasingly concerned with choosing products that are responsibly sourced and made. FSC chain of custody certification allows companies to use the FSC label, giving consumers assurance about the origin of the products they buy. The FSC 100% label signifies that a product is made entirely from FSC certified forest material. The FSC mix label lets people know that certified wood has been supplemented with non-certified materials. However, this non-certified material needs to adhere to a certain standard, either the reclaimed wood standard or the controlled wood standard. So deforestation. I read an article in the New Yorker a couple of months ago that equated all forestry for the furniture industry as deforestation, which is absolutely not true. So, but we have to know that sort of misperception is out there. Managed forestry is not deforestation. Deforestation refers to the permanent removal of a forest stand. That's why it's called deforestation. This process usually involves clear cutting and burning trees, bulldozing stumps to remove them, and then conversion of that area to another land use, architectural, agriculture, or commercial development. Much of Eastern North America was deforested at one point or another, and it's hard to find truly virgin old growth forests in those areas today. European settlers often cleared large chunks of land to create agricultural lands and used the high quality timber to build America's first towns and cities. Many areas have since been restored to forests, while some remain converted for farming, residential and urban uses, or industrial areas. Some U.S. forests are still cleared for these uses, but true deforestation mostly occurs in tropical regions, often in low-income areas or countries without strict environmental enforcement in place. According to the UN, halting deforestation could be one of the most cost-effective actions for mitigating and adapting to climate change and reducing biodiversity loss. It would avoid direct emissions from the lost biomass, as well as maintain the capacity of forests to absorb carbon and support resilience and sustainable livelihoods. Only rapid and drastic reductions in greenhouse gases in this decade can prevent climate breakdown, according to the UN, United Nations. Sustainably managed forest ecosystems help regulate hydrologic cycles and can reduce the likelihood of agricultural losses from drought, soil erosion, landslides, and floods. So, wood's long-term role in carbon sequestration. The relative sustainability of materials, products, and projects, and even companies and industries are expressed in terms of their carbon footprint, also known as embodied carbon or global warming potential, GWP. CO2, because of the two oxygen molecules, right? One molecule carbon, two molecules of oxygen, is 3.67 times heavier than the carbon molecule. So carbon weighs one thing, CO2, if you can weigh it, it weighs 3.67 times more than just the carbon. This is why embodied carbon numbers can sometimes actually outweigh the material itself. In materials, a specific constant volume is cited in stating embodied carbon, usually a cubic meter when we're talking about building materials, for easier comparisons. Oh, I got behind another slide again, guys. I apologize for that. So CO2e, or CO2 equivalent, is a standard unit for measuring embodied carbon. The idea is to express the impact of each different greenhouse gas in terms of the amount of CO2 that would create the same amount of global warming. That way, carbon footprint consisting of lots of different greenhouse gases can be expressed as a single number. So I hope that's clear. CO2e is really kind of the accepted metric for measuring climate impact, no matter what the mix of greenhouse gas emissions is in a product, process, or industry. So some fun stats. So with all this in mind, here are the embodied carbon stats for some common construction materials. A cubic meter of aluminum has a carbon footprint or an embodied carbon impact of 18,009 kilograms. Different numbers come from different methods of production in different parts of the world. In Canada, it's only 5,400 kilograms. In Asia, it's 45,900 kilograms for 1 cubic meter of aluminum. A cubic meter of steel has a carbon footprint of 12,090 kilograms. Glass has a carbon footprint of 3,600 kilograms per cubic meter. Reinforced concrete has a carbon footprint of 635 kilograms. And wood has a negative carbon footprint of 1,290 kilograms, because wood is storing more carbon than is released in its production and conversion into products. So the footprint of wood is negative because it's actually storing more naturally captured carbon than is released in its production and use. An analysis of the amount of composite wood shipped by just one of the large wood products distributors in North America showed that over 127 million metric tons of carbon, not CO2e, but actual carbon. So take that 127, multiply it by 3.67 to get the CO2e. 127 million metric tons of carbon were being sequestered in just those materials that they moved in the year 2021. This is about 50 million metric tons more carbon than is released in the production and the use of these materials. It's important to note that there is no certification yet for long-term carbon storage in wood products. There are efforts underway in both the North American and the European Union to remedy this. Embodied carbon or carbon footprint figures do not take into consideration the carbon stored in these materials. So wood is even better than we know. We just don't have the math or the political legitimacy to back it up yet. So the more efficiently we can use fiber from these forests, the longer that captured carbon remains sequestered. This means striving to use as much fiber as possible from harvested trees and creating high demand, durable, and beautiful products with it. Because wood fiber is 50% naturally captured carbon, your average 80-pound sheet of particle board is storing 40 pounds of naturally captured carbon. This is actually about 16 pounds more than was released in its harvest and use. This is 40% more carbon being kept out of the atmosphere than was released in the production and use of composite wood panels like particle board. And this, in essence, we're keeping 40% more out of the atmosphere than it cost us in terms of carbon to create this material. So this gives us literally a little breathing room in the carbon cycle, because these materials are carbon sinks and they're storing more carbon than we released and converting them into products that is sold by, I can't say brands, can I? Sold by healthcare and office furniture companies. So, and wood is the only material that we can call climate positive in these terms. The singularly unique property of wood is referred to as climate positive because its carbon footprint, the negative 1,290 kilograms per cubic meter, is a net positive for the environment. Because composite wood panels are more dense than solid wood, they sequester about twice as much carbon in the same volume. It's important to note here that solid wood is also climate positive or carbon negative. It's all based on the weight of the material and the density of the fibers. So that's why we can say the composite panels that are used in a lot of your products are actually sequestering more carbon than the same volume of solid wood would be able to. Ever increasing manufacturing efficiencies are turning out panels of higher quality using less material, further increasing their positive impacts. But these advances won't move the climate change needle until they're widely used and remain in use for as long as needed. So another glossary break here, climate positive. It's a term that is increasingly used by brands like IKEA, H&M, and others as a friendlier and less confusing way to say carbon negative. They mean essentially the same thing, any product or process that removes more CO2 from the atmosphere than is released in its production and use. In our terms, climate positive also lets us expand the conversation beyond just carbon, to talk about the forestry, durability, longevity, and that sort of thing. So, making the most out of a renewable resource, right? Forestry leadership from wood products companies is the header in the script. Wood could be said to be nature's perfect building material because it's strong, flexible, easy to work with basic tools, and easy to maintain. And of course, it's a truly bio-based material that requires few, if any, human inputs to grow. Wood product manufacturers have always strived to make the most of the resources through innovation and creativity. Up until the middle of the last century, half of the fiber from harvested trees, which were the fiber that was unusable for wood flooring or lumber or siding, was left in the forest to rot or burn. The wood industry found ways to make productive use of this waste wood fiber, first through plywood, and then through particle board, and then MDF, and of course, OSB and other materials like this. Through these innovations, we're now able to productively use over 99% of the wood we harvest versus just 50%, 60 or 70 years ago. We're able to use 99% of that tree. So in essence, the composite wood panels begin life as a recycled product because we're using material that was formerly waste. Some of the fiber utilized for particle board and MDF is sawdust and offal from sawmills and wood shops, but much of it is low value pulpwood that used to be left to rot in the woods or burned, returning all of that stored carbon in the atmosphere over minutes, months, and years. It's important to note that when commercial grade particle board was invented around 1950, the wood industry wasn't clairvoyantly creating a backstory for the best climate positive materials message 70 years later. Rather, this innovation and others like MDF and high density fiberboard were created because this industry is notoriously frugal, creating as much value as possible from their investments in harvesting and renewing forests. So, composite wood, building with captured carbon. Understanding wood's role in the carbon cycle allows us to literally design and build with materials made from 50% naturally captured atmospheric carbon. The longer these furniture products and design projects are in use, the longer that carbon is sequestered. Many of these products are specifically designed to replace other materials that aren't nearly as durable and have a much higher carbon footprint impact on natural resources, adding to their climate positive benefits. Even better news, these carbon sequestering materials are also some of the most affordable and design forward decorative materials on the planet. Most suppliers offer extensive matching programs for easy value engineering for performance and budget without sacrificing design integrity and vision. And just a quick side note, I'm working with the kitchen cabinet industry, and we've estimated that the average North American kitchen is storing about 600 pounds of naturally captured carbon. This is the kind of math they want to use to promote the environmental benefits of wood-based products. And it's not greenwashing, right? And I have to say, this is a little bit of a challenge we have with this story in our industry and with the consumers, is the wood story and its carbon impacts are so powerful and so positive that it sounds like greenwashing. So I just want to let you know that everything we're talking about here is based on research done by the Composite Panel Association, UN statistics, forestry management practices, and 8th grade science, which is where we get photosynthesis. I don't know, maybe it was 6th grade. Anyway, so we have to be very, very, sorry about that, careful of greenwashing. Every conversation about sustainability should include a discussion about the cardinal sin of greenwashing. We've all seen the research that shows younger generations are willing to pay more for sustainable and healthy products, to take a pay cut, actually, to work for companies that resonate with their values and are fiercely loyal to sustainable brands. They also very much hate being lied to. So, how to spot greenwashing, right? Not all greenwashing is intentional or sinister, of course, but the effect is the same. Here are some general types. Fluffy language, terms with no clear meaning like green, eco-friendly, or natural. Green products from dirty companies. Watch out for hypocrisies such as efficient light bulbs made in a factory that pollutes rivers. Evocative pictures. Don't use branding images that give an unjustified green impression, such as flowers blooming from exhaust pipes. Designations that are just not credible. Look out for obvious attempts to green, quote unquote, a dangerous product to make it seem safe. Eco-friendly cigarettes, anyone? Imaginary friends. Use of a label that looks like a third-party endorsement, but is actually made up. And outright lies, right? Never use totally fabricated claims or data. To add an example from the commercial interiors world that might best be referred to as a bait and switch, several high carbon footprint countertop materials that tout an 80-year lifespan as a sustainable material. Yes, okay, longevity is sustainable, but how many people are going to keep a kitchen counter for 80 years? Some of these same material categories, when you click on what's sustainable about this, they go straight to indoor air quality, which is not technically sustainability, it's health and wellness. Sustainability is part of the health and wellness story, but we have to be very, very, very careful that we aren't crossing boundaries and blurring lines like this. So Everything we're talking about is based on LCAs when we're talking about wood and its sequestration properties. A life cycle assessment is defined as a systematic analysis of the potential environmental impacts of products or services during their entire life cycle, including all relevant inputs from the environment, as well as emissions into the air, water, and soil. LCAs are conducted under ISO guidelines and according to product category rules. LCAs are also the basis for EPDs. You guys are probably all very familiar with EPDs that demonstrate transparent, comparable, and objective third-party verified data regarding any product or surface. So we're in the home stretch here. The climate positive role of the commercial furniture makers. Commercial and healthcare furniture producers use a lot of composite wood. According to the Composite Panel Association, the embodied carbon in the particle board and MDF used by the office furniture sector alone, we don't have figures for the healthcare sector, the office furniture sector alone adds up to over 589,300 metric tons of sequestered CO2. This number comes from the Composite Panel Association, who only really track material produced in North America. So anybody who's using materials coming from other sources, that number just grows. So yeah, and unfortunately, we do not have tracking yet for the healthcare sector. So durable and decorative surfaces like HPL, TFL, and 3DL are used to ensure composite wood components fit into any decor scheme and last for years, if not decades, which keeps that carbon stored and out of the carbon cycle for as long as possible. These decorative surfaces are also engineered to be easy to keep clean with simple soap and water solutions, reducing the need for harsh chemical cleaners that also negatively impact human health and indoor air quality. The industry is beginning to explore end-of-life solutions, and this is where we'd love help from major producers, explore end-of-life solutions for commercial furniture components. As demand grows, more reuse and recycling options are sure to emerge. It should be noted that even if landfilled, wood products will keep storing their captured carbon for decades, if not hundreds of years. Further, ongoing research into the impacts of laminates used on these products indicates that because they are essentially inert, they do not pose a threat to groundwater or soil quality in the case where they're landfilled. Some commercial furniture producers are closer to the land than others with their own forests and land management systems. And most manufacturers in North America invest heavily in efficient manufacturing technology, energy-saving plants and offices, and sustainable packaging and shipping. So, as designers and specifiers for projects utilize literally tons of materials, you are able to make a measurable difference as designers in addressing the carbon footprint of our built environments. We've covered an awful lot of ground on the CEU, so let's take a moment to review. Climate change is being caused by imbalances in the carbon cycle. 40% or more of yearly CO2 emissions are caused by the construction and operation of commercial buildings. Much of that is related to the materials for furniture and interiors. Removing CO2 from the atmosphere helps us slow the adverse effects of climate change. Forests naturally capture CO2 and produce life-sustaining oxygen. Wood fiber from these forests store naturally captured carbon until it rots or burns. Composite wood panels store 40% more carbon than is released in their production and use. Durable decorative surfaces increase the application potential and lifespan of these panels. The climate positive attributes of materials like composite wood help companies tell a better climate positive story. Too often, conversations around sustainability are clouded by an alphabet soup of eco-labels, certifications, misleading equivalencies, and the complexity of the science used to measure impacts. With this understanding of climate change's main culprit, carbon, and of the natural climate positive properties of wood and wood products, you are now able to share what is easily the best sustainability story in the world. Questions time. We made it.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Ken.
There you are. Hey, Jared.
That was That was a lot of information on some topics that are not easily explained, but you did a great job.
I saw some edits. I was making little edits on the way, so it's a growth process. But yes, thanks for this opportunity. I'm very proud of this, and I'm so happy you guys are interested in telling this story because it's so important.
Yes. And like I said, it's a lot of information, a lot of research went into it, I'm sure. So we really appreciate it. I didn't see any questions come in. But certainly if anyone has questions, you can let us know. We can always reach out to Ken or try to answer ourselves.
Hey, Ken, this is Darren. I'm curious. Sometimes I hear about volcanic activity. How does that play into or impact the info you just gave us?
This is where the science feels like it's all over the place. I've tried to find something that is citable and relatable, but of course it's so irregular, right? There's not a consistent output of volcanic activity. But as far as I can tell, it does not come close to measuring our outputs from fossil fuels. But you know, that could change, right? They say the same thing about forest fires, but we're having unique forest fire events now that are you know, yet to be measured. It might be years before we truly can understand it. But as I live in southern Wisconsin, and we spent half of the summer under air quality alerts from the Canadian forest fires. And I'm thinking about, you know, the parts per million and all, you know, of carbon in the atmosphere, and then the other impurities and particulate. I'm like, God, that could all be in somebody's kitchen in a cabinet, right? And here's one thing I learned too, and as like I say, this is a moving target. I just learned a few days ago that, you know, the forest management practices that we've been doing as furniture industries, as lumber companies over the last 50, 60 years, don't cut it anymore, right? No pun intended. We are using forestry practices from a world that had a much different moisture distribution and temperature globally. So everything that was kind of fine for natural forest fires 30 years ago is now a ticking time bomb. So we can't say that we've got this figured out, just keep doing what you're doing. This whole effort needs to be and driven through, you know, you guys and your customers and the people you talk to have a big voice in this world. We need to keep pushing these industries a little bit harder, a little bit further, for more accountability, more transparency, of course, and really adapting to how quickly things have started to change. I get lots of requests for making things relatable to specific markets. And I mentioned the kitchen cabinet industry saying, hey, what if you could build your next kitchen out of 600 pounds of naturally captured carbon? And then sort of the caveat is, joke's on you, you're already doing it. But our industry is just not talking about it in those terms, right? The incredibly wonderful Doug Shapiro was on a panel discussion with me last month at the AWFS event in Atlanta. And we had the chief sustainability officer of the ASID at the time, John Stroessner, on the panel as well. Doug told a really great story. I hope he shared it with you guys about how to understand the different values between, okay, it's time to harvest this tree, it's going to start dying, let's convert it into furniture, versus the crowd that says, hey, let's just let this die and fall over in the forest like God wanted it to happen, right? Or whatever. He did a great job of turning that into a story, almost a children's book story that really nails it in about 3 minutes. So sorry, Doug, I'm putting you on the spot. And the other great comment was from John Stroessner from the ASID. He said, you know, and he's speaking to furniture manufacturers, he goes, you know, your materials, your products are at least 50% of every project we do by volume or weight, right? Lots and lots of wood. But the wood industry is about 5% mind share, right? And he said, if you tell a designer, make this as sustainable a project as possible, their first thought is not going to be more wood, right? They're going to search high and low for something else that must be more sustainable. And I blame it on us, the wood industry, because we just have not done a good job of getting the story into the right format, into the right language, and in front of the right people. So you guys are where the rubber meets the road in this journey.
Does this info equate Ken and Jared into Ecomedes or BIFMA level for lead points to then by tonnage, or is it just assigned to the product categories that are used in their testing?
There are lots of, so if you go to the Composite Panel Association, which is where I get a lot of my science for the carbon story, they list specific lead advantages. I don't mention it so much because that does keep changing as well, and it goes over the heads of a lot of the people that I deal with on a regular basis. Let me know if you think you need more specific lead data in there. But I think it's still the case that wood products aren't getting the credit they deserve from protocols like LEED, right? Nobody's talking about stored carbon. And so there are some research efforts to try and put like the long-term storage of carbon into a quantifiable carbon number that we can subtract from footprint, or in our case, add to the negative side of the footprint. But I don't know, maybe Jared, you got a better grab on that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like BIFMA level goes, the products that we produce that utilize a larger amount of wood or composite wood, we're able to achieve additional credits for those products versus something like a plastic and steel chair. So yes, it does impact level certification to a certain point. And then as far as like Ecomedes goes, Ecomedes is really just a tool to be able to select a certain amount of products for a particular project, and then it easily outputs how that product can contribute to any of the green building rating systems like LEED or well building or living building challenge or whatever it is.
But it sounds like we might not be calculating into those programs right now, the stored captured carbon.
We do to a certain extent. And also with like particle board as an example, it's a high amount of recycled content as well. It's considered pre-consumer recycled content. So we do some of those calculations. What we haven't gotten deep into yet is actual life cycle assessments and creating environmental product declarations. Because with wood, it's much easier because a lot of the data is out there already, because of work done by organizations like Composite Panel Association. But when you look at our products and all of the different materials that are going into them, it's pretty resource intensive to try to gather all of the life cycle information for all of the materials that are going into those products, because that's ultimately what a rating system would look for. They're wanting the life cycle information for the entire product, not just individual materials.
And what I've found through working with the ASID and even the RV industry, the kitchen industry, everybody who's using lots of wood, is that you can have these certifications and meeting these eco labels and whatnot, but you have to put all of that data into a story that you can tell, something that resonates. I mean, I've done CEUs for commercial carpeting companies and rubber flooring and wall coverings and lighting and all this stuff. I've been able to observe a lot of these other industries and how they tell their stories, and it's very much built to turn your interior designer specifier into a salesperson, basically, for your company or your product, because you have to give them something they connect with emotionally enough that it's top of mind, and they happily share it with their clients as a cocktail conversation, right? So that's what I'm trying to do with this carbon story and the whole climate positive approach, is how can we tell this in a way that fits into like Doug did with his I forget what he titled the story. It was very cool though, in a way that is just very, very simple easy to remember, easy to get excited about, but based on science, right? So it's like the eco labels are at one level. I mean, I did some projects with the lead interior designer from Starwood Hotels, some presentations to A&D teams for a few years. And she had the story she would tell in presentations. She said, you know, if I am designing a brand standard for the Aloft brand, right, which she did, and you come to me and you want to sell me your furniture or your lighting or your wall covering, and I ask you, what's sustainable about your product or your material or your company, and you tell me, oh, it's all on our website, go have a look, all the labels on our sustainability page. She said, that conversation is over. She goes, if that salesperson can't sit in front of me and tell me the story of why I should buy their materials based on a sustainability angle, then I know it's not part of the company DNA. And I don't want to do business with that kind of company. So having the story is the first thing, and then having all of the you know, data and certifications and whatnot to back it up is kind of the foundation. But the story has to be told by just about everybody, right, in the company. I just saw a great documentary, you guys. I would recommend this. Actually, you can't stream it yet, but it's a documentary on Interface Flooring and their journey on telling the sustainability story starting in 1970, and they set the standard for the commercial carpet tile world. It's called Beyond Zero. And I'm actually working with the ASID to see if we can have a licensed screening. You have to license it to be able to show it to a certain number of people at this point. But their whole mission was to figure out, you know, what they can do with a product that's not very sustainable. How can they get there incrementally over decades? And they did it, and it's brilliant. But it really is, for them, it was always based on the story first.
We did have one question come in here, Ken, and this is not something I have ever run across, but Mike McFarland is asking, is there a breakdown on the carbon percentage stored by branches, leaves, bark, roots, etc.? And
it's stored in the leaves too, right? To certain degrees. The woody mass part of a tree is 50% carbon by weight. So yes, branches, you know, to a degree before they, you know, are just really, really small. The problem is getting something productive out of the very smallest parts of the tree, the tiniest bits of the branches, right? The composite wood industry can use branches up to a certain degree, but at a certain point, it's just not compatible with any of the processing technology we have right now. And when I mentioned earlier that the forestry industry needs to evolve and their management practices because of the changes in the climate that are making drier, you know, longer, drier areas turn into bombs. What I've heard from some people say is these Canadian forest fires are burning in managed forest areas because of all of the trash left on the ground after they sustainably harvest the trees. Even the stuff that was safe to leave on the ground in the 80s is no longer safe to leave on the ground. So maybe that will drive the industry into figuring out how to turn even the teeniest twigs into something productive.
all right, well, if there are no other questions, we'll, I guess, wrap it up here. I did put the information in the chat to contact me if you want the slide deck and script information. We also have a document that could help you field any questions regarding OFS's carbon position, like our carbon position statement, if customers have questions about what we're doing. And then let's see here, I had one more note. Oh, also, when scheduling any CEUs, if you can contact me prior to that date, let me know what date and time and where it's going to be held. I know a lot of them are virtual, but just if it's your location, that's fine, because I do have to go into IDCEC's site and schedule those ahead of time. So that's an important step. Yeah, I think that's it. Ken, we really appreciate it. Great information. I know, like I said earlier, a ton of work went into that, so we really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity, and I want to encourage all 180 people or whoever's on here. I was told there'd be lots and lots of people to find me on LinkedIn. Let's link up. Please sign up for our mailing list on climatepositivenow.org. Like I say, we are constantly finding new ways to talk about this. We're allowed to keep evolving as CEU. I think we can change up to 25% of the content before we have to go through recertification. So let's keep this a living document, because yeah, new facts emerge. I found a couple I've got to change already. So I'll get that to you, Jared, once I've had a chance to go through it again.
Sounds good.
Thanks again,
All
everybody.
right. Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.